Where'd you learn this?
Learned it from an old Chinese.
Did he make it?
No.
Hello everyone, and welcome to another video on our own devices. I'm T.Mi.Z, and today I'm at the Royal Canadian Artillery Museum in Shilo, Manitoba, having a look at some of the fascinating items they have in their bomb room. Specifically, today we're going to be looking at World War II German landmines. Now, both in the interwar period and the war itself, the Germans were far and away the world leaders in landmine warfare, not only in the mechanical design of the mines themselves, but also in the doctrine of their deployment, to the point that even today, many mine designs still in use around the world are either direct copies or at least direct descendants of German World War II designs, and mine tactics derived from German World War II doctrine are still taught in military academies to this day. Now, as the war progressed and the Germans found themselves progressively more and more on the defensive, they employed landmines as an effective means of denying territory and slowing or stopping enemy attacks. And by the end of the war, they had deployed some 35 million landmines, second only to the Soviets, who deployed 67 million. Now, the specifics of German World War II mine-laying doctrine, how they laid out minefields, marked them, etc., is a huge topic and well beyond the scope of this video. The Germans produced some 26 different types of landmines, both anti-tank and anti-personnel, by the end of the war, and the mechanical design of those is a whole topic unto itself, and that is what we are going to be focusing on today. Right, so the first items we're going to be looking at here are some of the most famous and influential mine designs of the war, the so-called Tellerminen or Tellermines, the name being derived from the German word for dinner plate. Now, these were metal-cased anti-tank blast mines designed to take the tracks off heavier armored vehicles or completely destroy lighter ones. Now, the first model produced, the Tellermine 29, was introduced in 1929 and measured 25 centimeters or 9.8 inches in diameter and contained a 4.5 kilogram or 10-pound TNT charge. The mine was set off by one of three Zug- und Drucksünder or ZD-Z29 pressure fuses screwed into the top surface of the casing. Any one of these fuses could set off the mine. The reason for having three was for redundancy and to spread the active area over the surface of the mine, increasing the probability that it would be set off. Now, the fuse itself contained a spring-loaded firing pin, which was retained by two shear wires and one removable pin. And the top of the fuse featured a slotted disc that could be turned to one of three settings. The first Druck or push setting inserted both shear wires so that it took 125 kilograms of pressure to set off the mine for anti-tank use. The second Druck setting removed one of the shear wires, so now it only took 45 kilograms to activate the mine for anti-personnel use. And the third setting, Zug or pull, removed both shear wires, so now the fuse would be set off by pulling out that pin. And this allowed the fuse to be used as an anti-handling device to prevent enemy sappers from defusing it. So the pin would be attached via a wire or a string, either to a stake put in the ground or to another mine, so that if the sapper lifted it up, it would detonate the mine in their hands. In addition, the Tellermine 29 had accessory fuse pockets in the side and on the bottom for fitting additional anti-handling devices. Now, around 61,000 Tellermine 29s were produced before 1937 when they were replaced by the more sophisticated Tellermine 35. The Tellermine 29s were all placed in storage and used for training, though a lot of them were deployed as an emergency measure at the end of the war, mainly on the Atlantic Wall. Now, the Tellermine 35, this guy here, was slightly larger than the Tellermine 29, measuring 31.8 centimeters or 12.5 inches in diameter, and containing 9.1 kilograms or 20 pounds of TNT. It is also simpler in design, having only a single central fuse pocket covered by a convex sheet metal pressure plate, such that pressure in excess of 180 kilograms or 400 pounds anywhere on the plate would set off the fuse and the mine. Just like the Tellermine 29, this also has auxiliary fuse pockets on the side and on the bottom for fitting an anti-handling device. Now, early in the Second World War, the Germans produced a slightly modified version called the Tellermine 35S, or Stahl, steel, which was virtually identical except it had a fluted pressure plate, the idea being to stop soil or sand from blowing off the top of the mine, exposing it when the mines were deployed in arid environments, such as the North African desert. Now, in 1942, the Germans replaced the Tellermine 35 with, you guessed it, the Tellermine 42, which was slightly smaller with a 5.5 kilogram or 12-pound explosive charge and a smaller pressure plate. And this was intended to guard against sympathetic detonations, that is, the detonation of one mine setting off the others with its blast wave. And finally, in 1943, the Germans introduced the, say it with me now, Tellermine 43, this guy here, which was identical in size and explosive charge to the Tellermine 42, but was designed to be more easily and cheaply manufactured. For example, the casing was made out of zinc rather than the more strategically vital steel, and instead of a spring-loaded pressure plate, this had this dome or mushroom-shaped cap, which would deform under a certain amount of pressure, crushing and setting off the fuse beneath. Now, the Tellermine could also be fitted with an optional tilt rod fuse, which was intended to allow other parts of the tank, such as its hull, to activate the mine, increasing the probability that the mine would be triggered. Now, originally, these were improvised using pieces of scrap metal and the ZZ35 pull fuse, but later an official version, known as the Kipsunder 43, was produced. Now, in total, some 13.5 million Tellerminen of all types were deployed between 1939 and 1944, about 75% of all the anti-tank mines laid by the Germans during the conflict. Now, it's worth pointing out here that the fuses from the earlier Tellermine models could easily be defused either by pushing in the arming bolt or simply unscrewing the fuse from the mine body. But this is no longer possible with the introduction of the T.Mi.Z 43 fuse, which incorporated its own anti-handling device. Now, this fuse worked very similarly to the hydrostatic pistols for depth charges that we covered in another video, link in the description. There was a spring-loaded firing pin held within two concentric sleeves that could slide past one another and retained by a set of balls that fit into a groove machined into the pin body and the inner sleeve. So when a tank drove over the fuse, it would push down the inner sleeve, cocking the firing pin spring and pushing the balls up to an opening that would allow them to fall out, releasing the firing pin and allowing it to spring down onto a percussion cap, setting off the detonator and the rest of the mine. Now, the threads for actually screwing the fuse into the fuse pocket were on the inner sleeve, while the outer sleeve was initially held to the inner sleeve with a shear wire. So when the mine layer screwed the fuse in and then kept twisting at the bottom, it would shear the wire and disconnect the outer sleeve from the inner sleeve. So now, if you were an enemy sapper and you just tried to unscrew the fuse, you would find that you can't, because you can't transfer any torque from the outer sleeve to the inner sleeve that has the screw threads. And if you happen to pull up on the outer sleeve, you're going to end up cocking and releasing the firing pin, setting off the mine. Now, this fact calls into question some of the accuracy of the otherwise excellent 2015 Danish film Under Sandet, also known in English as Land of Mine, which tells the story of German prisoners of war used for mine clearance in Denmark after the Second World War. And in that film, the German prisoners are shown defusing Tellermines of all kinds by simply screwing out the fuse. So if this was a T.Mi.Z 43, that would only result in them blowing themselves up. But otherwise excellent film and accurately shows the German tactic of using anti-handling fuses to confuse enemy sappers. Now, over the course of the war, the Germans developed a number of specialized variants of the various kinds of Tellermines, including a device intended to foil the Allied use of flail tanks for clearing minefields. And this consisted of a 20-kilogram or 44-pound explosive charge connected to a Tellermine by a 4-meter or 13-foot piece of detonating cord, such that when the flail tank detonated the Tellermine, the charge would blow up underneath the tank, destroying it. There was also the highly unusual Rollbombe, which was a Tellermine cast inside of a sphere of concrete and fitted with a time fuse, and this was used to defend cliff positions where the Rollbombe would just be rolled off the side of the cliff and detonate at the bottom. Now, simple, robust, and highly effective, the Tellermine proved a highly influential design and was widely copied by various countries after the war, including by Denmark as the M47, France as the Model 1948, and Yugoslavia as the TMM1, which remained in production until the 1980s and is still widely encountered to this day. Now, while the Tellermines were the most famous and commonly deployed German anti-tank mines of the war, they were far from the only ones. Case in point, this is a Riegelmine or Barmine 43, and this was inspired by the earlier Italian B2 and V3 mines. And being long and narrow, this could be laid crosswise along a road, in order to increase the chances that a tank would run over it and detonate it. So this consists of three basic sections. We have a bottom tray, a top tray, and a metal-cased explosive charge in the middle containing 4 kilograms or 9 pounds of amytal, a mixture of TNT and ammonium nitrate. The mine was set off by one of two ZZ42 pull-pin fuses at either end of the explosive charge, while a third well was provided for fitting another pressure fuse or an anti-handling device. And this whole assembly was armed via a rather intricate process. So ordinarily, the top tray and the explosive charge were prevented from falling into the bottom tray by a set of shear wires strung across the bottom tray, such that it took 400 kilograms or 880 pounds of force at the center, or 200 kilograms or 440 pounds at the ends to break the wires and set off the mine. You'll also notice this set of slots at the end. These are for a pair of safety bars, which would prevent the shear wires from being broken and the mine from being set off in storage. And when you pulled those bars out, a set of spring-loaded shutters on the inside would snap into place, preventing an enemy sapper from reinserting the bars or some other piece of metal to disarm the mines. But that wasn't the end of the arming process, because even now, if a tank ran over the mine and sheared the wires, the explosive charge would just fall to the bottom of the tray and the fuses wouldn't be set off. That's because the fuses are attached to the explosive charge and there is nothing around them to pull out the pin. So the next step in the arming process would be to turn a pair of discs at either end of the mine from sicher, or safe, to scharf, which translates literally as sharp, but it can also mean hot, as in the mine is hot. So let's go with that translation. And what this does is it rotates a little shelf into place that has a slot in the middle. So now if the top tray and the explosive charge are forced downwards and those shear wires break, those fuses are going to go through the slots in the shelves while the retaining pin is going to be stopped and pulled out, releasing the firing pin and setting off the mine. Now, if you are an enemy sapper, you unfortunately cannot just rotate those discs back to sicher to disarm the mine, because there is a spring-loaded catch that locks those discs in the scharf position. The only way of disarming this part of the mechanism is to turn the mine over, which is easier said than done because it's probably rigged with an anti-handling device, and push a pin through these little holes in the bottom to unlock that latch and allow you to rotate the discs back to sicher or safe. In total, a little more than 3 million Riegelmine 43s were produced between 1943 and 1945. Now, in addition to blast mines, the Germans also produced a number of anti-tank mines based on the hollow charge or shaped charge principle, including the Hohl-Sprung mine 4672 and the Panzerstabmine 43. Now, the former of these was basically the warhead and propellant charge from a Panzerfaust infantry anti-tank weapon mounted on a base plate and fitted with a tilt rod fuse, such that when a tank ran over the mine, the tilt fuse would be activated by the hull, the propellant charge would go off and propel the shaped charge warhead into the bottom of the hull and detonate. The Panzerstabmine 43, on the other hand, used a stationary shaped charge containing 1.6 kilograms of explosives. However, neither of these mines were produced in large numbers, primarily because it was decided that the Panzerfaust warheads were better employed in actual Panzerfaust, and also because of some infighting between the various departments of the Wehrmacht. Now, as the war dragged on, Germans found themselves facing two major problems when it came to mine warfare. One was major shortages of strategic materials, including steel, and the other was steadily improving Allied mine-clearing technology and tactics, particularly the widespread deployment of portable mine detectors such as the Polish mine detector Mark I. And so the Germans started producing an increasing number of minimal metal mines that not only made use of less strategically vital materials, but also used less metal in order to make them harder to detect. And the simplest of these was the B-Stabmine, which was an improvised anti-tank blast mine consisting of a 2.6 kilogram or 5.7 pound charge of PETN explosive contained in a wooden box, set off by a ZZ35 fuse fitted with a tripwire or tilt rod. Slightly more sophisticated was the Holzmine 42, which was also a rectangular wooden box waterproofed with bitumen divided into 3 compartments. The side compartments contained 5.4 kilograms or 12 pounds of amytal explosives, while the central compartment contained 3 200-gram explosive demolition charges acting as the booster charge, and this was in turn set off by a ZZ42 pull-pin fuse. Now, the wooden lid of the Holzmine 42 was prevented from closing by a pair of wooden shear dowels, such that when 90 kilograms or 200 pounds of force was applied to the lid, the dowels would shear and the lid would remove the retaining pin from the ZZ42 fuse, releasing the firing pin and setting off the booster charge and the main charge. Now, while these mines were effective as weapons and succeeded in reducing the amount of strategic materials consumed, unfortunately, they did contain quite a bit of metal in the hinges and fasteners, and especially the fuse, and thus could still be detected by Allied mine detecting equipment. Also, the cases tended to absorb a lot of water and start rotting after a very short amount of time in the ground, meaning that after a certain period, the mines became ineffective. Now, far more effective were the Topfmines or pot mines, which were true minimal metal mines. The cases were made out of compressed wood fiber or bituminous coal waste waterproofed with bitumen, and all fittings were made out of non-metallic materials, including plastic, wood, and glass. These mines used an SF1 chemical fuse, which contained 2 glass ampules, one filled with concentrated sulfuric acid, and other a mixture of powdered naphthalene and magnesium flash powder. So when a tank ran over the mine, it would crush these ampules, they would mix, react exothermically, and set off the detonator. Now, there were 3 different types of Topfmine produced during the war. The Topfmine A had a flat domed case rather resembling a curling stone containing 6 kilograms or 13 pounds of TNT or amatol with a pressure plate surrounded by a circular shear groove. 2 subvariants of the Topfmine A were produced, a regular variant and a waterproof variant for use in tropical climates. The Topfmine B moved the shear groove for the pressure plate to the inside so that the groove wouldn't accumulate water and allow it to infiltrate the interior of the mine, while the Topfmine C, also known as the Pop-Mine, changed the complex-to-manufacture domed casing with a much easier cylindrical one. Now, since the Topfmine contained barely any metal at all, they were very difficult for Allied mine detectors to find. However, they could very easily be located using German equipment, such as the Stuttgart 43 mine detector set. And this very much confused the Allies, and it wasn't until after the war that they figured out the German secret. See, the Topfminen were issued with a small bag of tarn sand or camouflage sand, which was meant to be buried along with the mine. And this sand was mildly radioactive, meaning it could be detected by the Stuttgart 43, which incorporated a simple Geiger counter. So a very elegant and clever solution. Now, the Topfmines almost completely replaced the Tellermines in German service from 1944 onwards. And while the Germans developed a number of other anti-tank mines, including the Panzerstabmine or L.P.Z., which was intended for use by airborne troops, and various aluminum or iron-cased variants of the Tellermines, those are produced in very small quantities, and we're not going to be looking at them today. Instead, let's move on to anti-personnel mines. So finally, we come to possibly the most famous or infamous mine design of the Second World War, the much feared S-Mine, which variously stands for Springmine, Splittermine, or Shrapnelmine, but was better known to the Allies as the Bouncing Betty, the Silent Soldier, or the Jumping Jack. So this was introduced in 1935, and it has an outer casing which holds the fuses and has a small gunpowder propelling charge, and an inner canister containing 4 kilograms or 8.8 pounds of TNT and 350 steel balls. So when the mine is activated, either by stepping on the fuse or pulling out a tripwire, the propellant charge fires and launches the inner canister up into the air. And after a half-second delay, when the canister is at about 1 meter above the ground, the explosive charge detonates, scattering those balls in all directions. And those balls had a lethal radius of 150 meters. So you can see why this is extremely effective and highly feared by Allied troops. Now, there were 2 main versions of the S-Mine, the SMI-35, like these examples, which had a centrally mounted fuse, and the SMI-44, which had an offset fuse. 4 different igniters could be fitted to the S-Mine. The standard was the SMI-Z-35, which worked on the same retaining ball principles as the fuses used in the Tellermines, and had these 3 distinctive pressure prongs on top designed to be stepped on. The mine could also be fitted with the ZZ-35 pull fuse for use with a tripwire, and the ZU-ZZ, which was a pressure and pull fuse. Finally, the ES-Mi-Z was an electrically activated fuse designed for use with the Minenabwehrvorrichtung, a simple mortar fitted to the hull of many German tanks for use against anti-tank teams and other nearby infantry. Now, there is a rather persistent and annoying Hollywood myth that when you step on a landmine, you need to step off of it again for the fuse to detonate. And this shows up in all sorts of movies. 2 that I can think of off the top of my head are Kingsman: The Golden Circle and The Monuments Men. And this is used to set up a very tense situation where they need to figure out how to get the mine out from under the person or how to figure out some other way for them to survive before the mine goes off. But this is absolute nonsense. So far as I know, no mine has ever been designed like this. But it turns out that this myth probably originated with the S-Mine, because you see, in order to ensure that somebody has stepped off of the mine and it has clearance for it to actually launch into the air, the fuse had a 4-second delay between it being activated and setting off the launching charge. So this was probably misreported by soldiers during the Second World War as you needing to step off the mine before it would detonate. Now, if you stay standing on top of an S-mine, it still will detonate, and if it doesn't launch you completely off your feet, 4 kilograms of explosives going off just under your foot will definitely blow your leg off. And indeed, the best way of surviving one of these, if you accidentally set one off, is to dive to the ground, because the balls are lethal in pretty much every direction except straight down. Now, around 2 million S-mines were produced throughout the war, and given how effective and widely feared this was, it should come as no surprise that, as with the Tellermine, the design was widely copied by other countries. For example, by France as the Model 1939, the United States as the M2 and M16, the Soviet Union as the OZM series, and Yugoslavia as the Prom-1, which was widely exported and is commonly encountered around the world to this day. But once again, while the S-mine was the most infamous German anti-personnel mine of the war, it was far from the only one. Far simpler was the Behelfs-Schutzenmine S.150, which consisted of a 6.4 centimeter or 2.5 inch diameter sheet steel cylinder filled with 340 grams or 12 ounces of picric acid explosive. This in turn was fitted with a Book chemical igniter, which used the same sulfuric acid flash powder combination as the SF1 fuse used in the Topfmine. The same fuse was used in the Behelfsmine W1, which was an improvised mine or booby trap constructed from the shell of the Model 1937 50mm French light infantry mortar, which the Germans captured in large quantities in 1940. Now, if 340 grams of explosives doesn't sound like a whole lot, that's because this was specifically calculated to be able to just blow a man's foot off. See, the Germans realized that a wounded man presents more of a logistical problem and a blow to his comrades' morale than a dead one, and so started developing smaller wounding mines as opposed to killing ones, which also had the advantage of economizing on explosives and other materials. Now, just as with anti-tank mines, as the war dragged on, the Germans started producing a series of minimal metal anti-personnel mines to economize on various strategic materials and to foil Allied mine detection attempts. And one example of this was the Stockmine or Betonmine, which consisted of a wooden stake with a small explosive charge at the top, wrapped in a piece of cast concrete containing metal fragments, and these were typically set off by pull fuses activated by a tripwire. Now, another commonly deployed minimal metal anti-personnel mine was the Schutzenmine or Schu-Mine 42, like this one. As you can see, this is basically a scaled-down version of the Holzmine 42, consisting of a small wooden box containing a 200-gram TNT charge. Now, this charge was chosen not only because it was just enough to blow a man's foot off, but also because it was a standard-sized demolition charge known as the Sprengköpfe 28, which was widely available in German army stocks. Now, just like the Holzmine 42, this did contain some metal in the hinges, the fasteners, and particularly the fuse, though very little, and so it was actually quite difficult for Allied mine detectors to find, even at close range. And so near the end of the war, the Allies had to resort to explosive-sniffing dogs to find these Schu-Mine 42s. Now, yet another minimal metal anti-personnel mine deployed by the Germans was the Flaschenmine or Glasmine 43, which, as the name implies, was made of glass. So this had a cylindrical glass body containing the same 200-ground Sprengköpfe 28 charge as the Schu-Mine and was set off by the same Book chemical igniter as the Behelfsmine. The top of the mine was closed with a 6.4mm or quarter-inch thick glass plate and a thick ridge glass pressure plate, which sat on top of the Book igniter. And while assembling the mine layer could lay a metal fork across the top to prevent him from accidentally pushing down the pressure plate. And the edges of this pressure plate could be sealed with a special provided putty to prevent water ingress into the interior of the mine. And so when the mine was stepped on, the glass pressure plate would move downwards, break the other glass plate, and then crush the Book igniter, mixing the chemicals, setting off the detonator, and setting off the rest of the mine. Now, around 3 million Glasminen were produced by the end of the war, but only around 1 million of them were actually deployed. And the Germans made anti-personnel mines out of a number of other materials, including clay and bakelite, with the latter model being known as the Schutzenmine. And that, dear viewers, is a brief history of German landmine designs of the Second World War. Now, I'm sure there's a couple of obscure models and variations that I missed, but I think that makes for a pretty comprehensive overview of the major types. Now, thank you so much for watching, and a huge shout out to the Royal Canadian Artillery Museum for allowing me to dig through their collection and pull out neat goodies like this to show you. I'll see you next time on another video or look at yet more fascinating weapons and other devices just like these. Until then, I'm T.Mi.Z from Our Own Devices. Have a great day.